The invitation arrived printed on heavy, textured cardstock, the kind that announced its importance with its weight alone. It smelled faintly of jasmine and exclusivity. The Sterling Mercer Foundation requests the honor of your presence at the unveiling of the Sterling Wing, a celebration of art, legacy, and community. Black tie. It was addressed to me, Mark Barlow, and a guest. Not to me and Chloe, just me. A single, clean line. It was Robert Sterling's version of a white flag, or more likely, a discreet audit. A year and a half of radio silence, and now this. I stared at the elegant script. My first visceral reaction was to light it on fire over my kitchen sink. My second reaction was to show it to Dot. She was in the middle of repotting a violently resilient spider plant she'd named Gus after my coworker. She wiped her earthy hands on her jeans, took the card, and let out a low whistle. Fancy. You going? Absolutely not. It's a trap, or a power play, or both. She read it again, her brow furrowed. It's at the museum, the one downtown. Free booze, probably. Fancy tiny food. We could go, eat a year's salary in canapes, and leave. Dot, you don't understand. These people, they don't just have parties. They stage productions. Everyone is a character, and everyone has a script. I'm the cautionary tale who got written out in the second act. Showing up is like walking back onto the stage after the play is over. She plopped the spider plant into its new pot with a definitive thump. Or, she said, turning to face me, her eyes sharp, it's you walking into the theater as a member of the audience, paying customer. You get to watch the play, see how stupid it looks from the cheap seat. The invitation arrived printed on heavy, textured cardstock, the kind that announced its importance with its weight alone. It smelled faintly of jasmine and exclusivity. The Sterling Mercer Foundation requests the honor of your presence at the unveiling of the Sterling Wing, a celebration of art, legacy, and community. Black tie. It was addressed to me, Mark Barlow, and a guest. Not to me and Chloe, just me. A single, clean line. It was Robert Sterling's version of a white flag, or more likely, a discreet audit. A year and a half of radio silence, and now this. I stared at the elegant script. My first visceral reaction was to light it on fire over my kitchen sink. My second reaction was to show it to Dot. She was in the middle of repotting a violently resilient spider plant she'd named Gus after my coworker. She wiped her earthy hands on her jeans, took the card, and let out a low whistle. Fancy. You going? Absolutely not. It's a trap, or a power play, or both. She read it again, her brow furrowed. It's at the museum, the one downtown. Free booze, probably. Fancy tiny food. We could go, eat a year's salary in canapes, and leave. Dot, you don't understand. These people, they don't just have parties. They stage productions. Everyone is a character, and everyone has a script. I'm the cautionary tale who got written out in the second act. Showing up is like walking back onto the stage after the play is over. She plopped the spider plant into its new pot with a definitive thump. Or, she said, turning to face me, her eyes sharp, it's you walking into the theater as a member of the audience, paying customer. You get to watch the play, see how stupid it looks from the cheap seats, and leave whenever you want. She walked over and tapped the invitation. Take me. I've never seen a rich person's freak show up close. I want to see the puppets dance, and I promise, if anyone looks at you wrong, I will spill a very expensive drink on a very expensive dress. I looked at her, her practical hands, her direct gaze, the utter absence of pretense. She was my armor, my reality check. The idea of taking Dot, with her sparrow tattoo and her disdain for pretense, into the heart of the Sterling universe was suddenly perversely compelling. It wasn't about facing my past, it was about inoculating my present against it. You'll need a dress, I said slowly. She grinned. I have a dress. It's black. It covers the essentials. They'll live. The night of the gala, Dot stood in my living room fidgeting with the strap of the simple, sleeveless black sheath she'd owned for a decade. She looked beautiful, but in a real, anchored way. She looked like Dot in a nice dress. I feel like a penguin that's lost its colony, she muttered. You look perfect, I said, and meant it. I was in a rented tuxedo that felt like someone else's skin. We were a pair of undercover agents, our mission, observe and exfiltrate. The museum was transformed. The grand marble hall, usually echoing with the hushed steps of tourists, was a shimmering sea of silk, tailored wool, and glittering jewels. A string quartet played something tastefully mournful. The air was a complex bouquet of perfume, money, and ambition. I felt a familiar, acidic knot form in my stomach. It was the smell of the game. We were just inside the entrance, collecting glasses of champagne from a passing tray, when I saw her. She floated into the room. That was the only word for it. She didn't walk. She seemed to glide on a current of her own making, a serene island moving through the suddenly parted sea of people. The dress was a slash of liquid silver, backless, draping her like a second skin before cascading to the floor. Her dark hair was swept up in an intricate, effortless-looking knot. Her smile was small, innocent, utterly radiant. She was a moonbeam in a room of tungsten bulbs. Ava Sterling, Chloe's sister. I hadn't seen her in over 2 years. She'd been away at some finishing school in Switzerland, then traveling, a ghost in the family lore. Chloe had spoken of her with a mix of exasperation and awe. Ava doesn't live in the world, she'd once said. The world is a set that exists for her benefit. She's allergic to effort. And now she was here, and the room was gawking. Men straightened their ties, women's eyes narrowed with appraisal and instant simmering envy. Conversations stuttered as she passed. She accepted the attention as her natural due, her smile never wavering, a princess among her subjects. My reaction was immediate and physical. A hot, coiling wire of pure, undiluted fury tightened in my chest. It wasn't about her beauty. It was the effortlessness, the sheer unearned grace of it. While I'd been scraping my knuckles in a garage, rebuilding my life brick by brick, while Chloe was presumably crunching numbers in London, and Diana was scripting her therapy in the Alps, Ava had been, what? Perfecting her float? It was the embodiment of everything the Sterlings represented. A universe where some people struggled in the mud, and others simply ascended, untouched, borne aloft by the invisible engines of wealth and privilege. Dot elbowed me gently. Who's the human disco ball? She's causing a traffic jam. I don't know, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. Dot's eyes tracked her progress. Huh, she looks like she's never had a bad thought, or any thought at all. What's her deal? Her deal is she's decorative, a perfect, useless ornament. The bitterness in my own voice surprised me. I thought I was past this. We drifted further into the room. I saw Robert Sterling near the podium, a cluster of important-looking men around him. He looked older, thinner, a knife that had been honed to a dangerous sharpness. He caught my eye from across the room. There was no flicker of recognition, just a brief scanning glance that catalogued me as part of the backdrop before moving on. I was neutralized, a non-variable. His gaze slid past me to the more important equations in the room. Then, as if summoned by my thoughts, Ava's trajectory altered. She was moving toward us. No, not toward us, toward me. Panic, cold and slick, washed over me. I had no script for this. I had prepared for ignored, for dismissed, for a quiet observation of my own obsolescence, not for a direct encounter with the family's glittering, vacant centerpiece. She stopped before us, her smile widening into something dazzling and utterly impersonal. Up close, she was even more startling. Her eyes were a pale, crystalline blue, like aquamarines. They held no depth, only a brilliant, reflective surface. "Mark," she said, her voice a soft, melodic chime. "I thought that was you. How wonderful to see you." She extended a hand, not to shake, but to be taken. It was a gesture from another century. I took it automatically. Her skin was cool, her grip feather-light. "Ava," I said, my jaw tight, "you look, well. It's such a lovely party, isn't it? Daddy is so proud." She turned her smile on Dot, who was watching the exchange with an analytical interest of a biologist observing an exotic, possibly venomous insect. "And you must be—" "Dot," Dot said, not offering her hand. "I'm with Mark." "How lovely," Ava repeated, the phrase clearly a default setting. Her gaze swept over Dot's simple dress without a hint of judgment, which was somehow more insulting than open disdain. It simply didn't register on her scale of things worth noting. "Are you enjoying the champagne?" The gala should have been the end of it. A final, glitzy bookmark slammed shut on the Sterling chapter of my life. Dot's exorcism theory was sound. I'd seen the ghost, confirmed it was insubstantial, and was supposed to move on. I tried. For a week, I threw myself into the tangible world. I replaced a transmission in a vintage Chevy with a Focus so intense, Gus asked if I was trying to marry the damn thing. I helped Dot repaint her diner's kitchen a cheerful, defiant yellow. I cooked elaborate, messy meals that left sauce stains on the stove. I was performing reality, aggressively. But Ava Sterling wouldn't evaporate. She lingered, not as a person, but as a cognitive splinter. That perfect, empty smile, the way she'd called my devastation silly business, the utter, profound waste of her. It wasn't jealousy that gnawed at me now. It was a kind of furious incredulity. How could something so meticulously crafted be so utterly pointless? The answer, of course, was that it couldn't. The Sterlings didn't do pointless. Robert's every breath was transactional. Diana's madness had a ruthless theatrical logic. Chloe's coldness was a strategic defense. Ava's vacancy had to be a function. I just couldn't decipher the code. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, the code walked into Dave's auto. I was buried in the engine bay of a stubborn Toyota, my world reduced to the smell of oil and the puzzle of a misfiring cylinder. The bell on the shop door jingled, a sound usually accompanied by the slump of a weary customer or Gus's booming greeting. This time, there was a strange hush. I slid out from under the hood. A woman stood just inside the doorway, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the gloom. She was dressed in incongruous beige cashmere and pristine white slocks, already speckled with grease from the doorframe. A silk scarf was tied artfully around her neck. It was Ava. Not the floating, moonbeam Ava of the gala. This version was paler, smaller. The effortless glide was replaced by a tentative, almost confused stance, like a heron that had landed in a mechanic's bay by mistake. She held a massive, sleek leather tote that probably cost more than our diagnostic computer. Gus was frozen, a wrench dangling from his hand, his mouth slightly agape. Dave, from his office window, peered out like a submarine captain spotting an unknown vessel. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice echoing too loudly in the sudden quiet. I wiped my hands on a rag, a pointless gesture. Her eyes found me, and a flicker of something, relief, annoyance, passed over her face. It was the most genuine expression I'd ever seen on her. "Mark. Oh, good. I was hoping you'd be here." She picked her way across the concrete floor, her delicate loafers utterly wrong for the environment. She stopped a few feet away, her nose wrinkling almost imperceptibly at the ambient smell of gasoline and stale coffee. "I have a situation." "This is an auto repair shop," I said, stating the obvious with a bluntness that felt necessary, a barrier. "Car won't start? Strange noise?" "It's not the car," she said, a hint of frustration bleeding into her chiming voice. She glanced around, as if the oil cans were listening. "Can we talk somewhere less?" She waved a hand, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the fluorescent light. Loud. Dave, sensing a customer service disaster, or maybe just profound entertainment, emerged from his office. "Use the office, Mark. It's quieter." I led the way, intensely aware of her behind me, of Gus's staring, of the absurdity of Ava Sterling in our grimy, functional space. Dave's office was a cluttered sanctuary of invoices, coffee mugs, and parts catalogs. I cleared a stack of old tires off a second chair for her. She looked at the worn vinyl, then at her white slocks, and perched on the very edge with a sigh that spoke of profound inconvenience. "So," I prompted, leaning against the desk, arms crossed. She set her tote on the floor with the care one might use for a bomb. "It's about a friend." I waited. "She's in a bit of a bind. A legal bind. Nothing serious," she added quickly, though her eyes darted away. "A misunderstanding about a piece of artwork, an acquisition that may not have been entirely documented." I almost laughed. "Ava, I fix cars. I don't fix art heists." "It's not a heist." The porcelain mask cracked a little, revealing a flash of real irritation. "It's a provenance issue. She bought something in good faith, and now the original owner is making unpleasant noises. Lawyers, threats. It's so sordid." "And what does this have to do with me?" She looked up at me, and for the first time I saw a calculation in her eyes that wasn't about social navigation. It was sharper. "My father's lawyers are corporate, sharks. They'd turn it into a whole thing, a scandal. Mother is unavailable, and Chloe is in London and would just tell me to let the lawyers handle it and stop being dramatic." She took a delicate breath. "I remembered you from before. Chloe said you were resourceful, that you understood complicated family dynamics, and you're outside of it all now." The flattery was clumsy, transparent, but the situation was bizarre enough to be credible. This was the silly business of her world. Minor art fraud, legal nuisances, problems solved by the right obscure contact. "I'm not a lawyer, Ava. I'm a mechanic." "But you know people, don't you?" she insisted, her voice dropping. "Real people. Not everything is solved in boardrooms with 100-page contracts. Sometimes it's about a quiet conversation, an understanding." I stared at her. She was asking me to be a fixer, to use my real-world connections, a concept she clearly viewed as a shadowy network of gritty problem solvers, to clean up her friend's mess. The sheer breathtaking gall of it was almost impressive. My resourcefulness, born of survival and blue-collar hustle, was now being scouted for its utility to her insulated world. "You want me to find someone to lean on this original owner? To make them go away?" "Oh no, nothing crude," she said, looking genuinely appalled. "Just a dialogue, facilitated by someone who speaks both languages, the language of galleries and the language of the street." She made the street sound like a foreign country she'd only read about in sensational novels. "I don't speak gallery, Ava, and I'm not a translator for rich people's problems." Her shoulders slumped, the performance of the distressed damsel seeming to exhaust her. The vulnerability that replaced it felt different. It wasn't the empty, radiant innocence of the gala. It was the petulance of a child whose favorite toy is broken. I don't know who else to ask. Everyone I know is either part of the problem or would use it as gossip. You're neutral." Neutral. Robert's word. The final verdict. A non-variable. To Ava, I was a tool that happened to be nearby, one that wouldn't show up on her family's radar. "I can't help you," I said, my voice final. The petulance hardened into something colder. The mask reassembled itself, but it was tighter, more brittle. "Well, thank you for your time." She stood, brushing non-existent dust from her slocks. She looked around the office, her gaze lingering on a grimy calendar from a parts supplier, a faded photo of Dave's old dog. Her expression was one of anthropological distance. This was where the help lived. She'd ventured into the servants' quarters and found them unwilling. She left without another word, the bell jingling her exit. Gus materialized in the doorway. What in the holy hell was that? A ghost. A very confused, very entitled ghost. But the encounter left me unsettled. It had revealed a crack. Ava wasn't just floating, she was adrift enough to try to recruit me for a shady errand. She was scared of her father's lawyers, of scandal, of Chloe's judgment. Her perfect world had a leak, and she was trying to plug it with the nearest piece of putty, me. A week later, Dot and I were at the diner during her break. I told her about Ava's visit. Dot listened, stirring her soda with a straw. So the princess has a friend with sticky fingers, and she thought you were some kind of underworld concierge? Hello, Mark. Yes, I'd like one art scandal resolved. Hold the violence. Unbelievable. It's not believable. That's what's bothering me. It was too stupid, too blatant. Rich people are often stupid about how the real world works, Mark. You know that. Not Robert, not Chloe. Their stupid is calculated. This felt desperate. Dot shrugged. Maybe she's just the dumb one. Every family has one. I let it go, but a seed of suspicion had been planted. The friend's art problem felt like a cover story, a test balloon. The confirmation came from an unexpected source, LinkedIn, a connection request from a man named Julian Thorne. His profile was sleek, independent art consultant and acquisition specialist, Basel, Zurich, New York. I didn't know him, but his profile picture showed a man in silence followed my blockade of Julian Thorne. For 3 weeks, the world reverted to its honest rhythms, the grind of metal, the hiss of the air compressor, the comfortable, predictable cadence of life with Dot. I told her about the LinkedIn connection in the follow-up text, leaving out my amateur sleuthing. She'd only worry, or worse, tell me to go to the police, a useless suggestion when the only crime so far was a vague digital whisper. They're like mosquitoes, she declared, flipping a pancake with a practiced wrist flick. Buzz in your ear, try to suck a little blood. You swat them away, they find someone else. Just keep the screen door closed. I tried to adopt her metaphor, but Ava Sterling wasn't a mosquito. She was a beautifully engineered parasite, and she'd tasted my potential. I knew, with a cold certainty that sat in my gut like a stone, that she wouldn't just find someone else. I'd been vetted. My neutrality, my outsider knowledge, my perceived desperation. It made me the ideal candidate. I'd refused the first offer. The next move would be more persuasive. It arrived not as a text or a social media gambit, but as an object, a small flat package couriered to the shop. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, but the shipping label bore the insignia of a high-end boutique art shipping company. My name and the shop's address were typed with sterile precision. Dave brought it to me, holding it between thumb and forefinger as if it were radioactive. Fan mail? My heart hammered against my ribs. I took it to the office, closing the door against Gus's curious stare. Using a box cutter, I slit the tape. Inside, nestled in custom-cut gray foam, was a book. Not a new book, an old one. Its leather cover was worn soft, the spine creased with careful reading. There was no note. I lifted it out. The Quiet American by Graham Greene, a first edition, or a very good early one. It was a novel about innocence, idealism, and the catastrophic, cynical games of empires. It was also, I remembered with a chill, a book Chloe had once mentioned her father considered a masterclass in practical geopolitics. Robert had a first edition in his library. He'd shown it to me once, a rare moment of almost human connection, pointing out a passage about the clean pain of necessary decisions. This was his copy. I was sure of it. The faint smell of his study, leather, old paper, and a particular brand of polish still clung to it. This was no longer Ava's clumsy recruitment. This was a message, and it was from a higher pay grade. My hands were steady as I opened the cover. There, on the front end paper, in Robert Sterling's precise, angular handwriting, was an inscription. For clarity of purpose, R.S. And below that, in a different, smoother ink, a new line had been added. Join us for dinner, Friday, 8 p.m., the townhouse. We'll send a car. No signature, no threat, just an irresistible summons and a piece of my past used as a calling card. The book was a threat and a promise. It said, "We know what you value, we know what you know, and we are not asking." The fury was a cold fire now. They were treating me like a piece on their board again. But the move was so bold, so arrogant, it circled back to being revealing. They didn't just want a cutout anymore. They wanted me in the room. Something had escalated. Dot was my first instinct, but I stopped myself. Telling her would mean dragging her into the Sterling's orbit, and that was a contamination I refused to allow. My second instinct was to burn the book, ignore the invitation, and change my phone number. But the stone in my gut told me that wouldn't work. You didn't ignore a summons from Robert Sterling when he'd personally laced it with a piece of his own history. This was a test of a different kind, a test of consequence. I spent 2 days in a state of suspended animation. I worked on cars, I ate meals, I kissed Dot goodnight, all while my mind raced in a silent, frantic loop. What did they want? Why now? The art problem couldn't be this big, unless it was. On Thursday, I made a decision. I wouldn't go as a supplicant or a potential recruit. I would go as an observer, an embedded journalist behind enemy lines. If this was the final act of the Sterling saga, I needed to see the curtain fall, for my own closure, and perhaps for a sliver of leverage. I told Dave I had a family thing Friday night. I told Dot I was helping Gus with a side job on his brother's boat, an all-nighter. The lies tasted like ash. Friday evening, I stood in my apartment wearing the same rented tuxedo from the gala. It felt even more like a costume now. At 7:45 p.m. precisely, a black town car pulled up outside my building. The driver, a man in a dark suit and cap, didn't speak, just held the door open. The drive to the Sterling townhouse was a journey back in time. The elegant tree-lined streets, the imposing facades of brownstones that whispered of old money and quiet power. It was a world I once aspired to, then fled from. Now, it just felt like a well-appointed prison. The car stopped. The driver opened my door. I stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the 4-story limestone building. Every window was ablaze with light, but the effect was cold, museum-like. No warm glow of a home, just a display. The door was opened by a uniformed maid I didn't recognize. "Mr. Barlow, they are in the library." She led me through the familiar, terrifyingly perfect rooms. Nothing had changed. The same modern art hung in the same spots, the same ruthless cleanliness. It was as if the last 2 years of my life had been a dream, and I'd simply paused a movie that was now resuming. The library doors were closed. The maid opened them, announced me softly, and withdrew. The room as I remembered, floor-to-ceiling shelves, ladders on rails, the massive partner's desk. A fire crackled in the marble fireplace, but it gave no warmth. 3 people were in the room. Robert Sterling stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel, a crystal tumbler of amber liquor in the other. He wore a smoking jacket, an affectation so anachronistic it was pure power play. He nodded at me once. "Mark, thank you for coming." Diana sat in a high-backed armchair near the fire, her thinner famous cheekbones more pronounced, her elegance edged with a new, brittle sharpness. She wore a severe black dress, her hair pulled back tightly. Her eyes, when they met mine, held none of the previous theatrical warmth, or even the spite of our last call. They were flat, assessing. The treatment had not softened her, it had honed her into a scalpel. She offered a faint, meaningless smile. And Ava, she stood by the desk, leaning against it with studied casualness. She wore a simple cream-colored silk pantsuit that probably cost as much as my car. Her hair was down, loose. She looked serene, but her eyes, when they flicked to me, held a glint of something hard and excited. She was the one who had lobbied for this. I could feel it. "Please sit," Robert said, gesturing to a chair opposite Diana. It was placed directly in front of the fire, so I'd be silhouetted, facing both of them, a deliberate positioning. I sat. I didn't speak. "A drink?" Robert asked. "No, thank you." He raised an eyebrow, almost approvingly, getting down to business. He took a sip from his own glass. "You received the book." "I did. It's a favorite of mine. I thought you might appreciate it. You were always thoughtful. It's a book about the naivete of good intentions being exploited by cynical powers. I'm not sure which of us you see as the quiet American." An apt question. Perhaps we are all, at times, both the idealist and the pragmatist. He set his glass down. "We have a situation, one that requires a unique skill set and discretion." Ava mentioned an art problem? Ava shifted slightly. "A simplification," she said, her voice soft but clear. "It's more of a logistical entanglement." Robert shot her a look that silenced her. This was his briefing. "The entanglement involves a collection of pre-Columbian artifacts, acquired over several years through a private channel. The acquisitions were made in good faith, but the documentation has proven to be incomplete. The original seller has vanished. The items are currently in a secure location outside the country, but their path to a final, legitimate resting place is obstructed." He spoke in sterile euphemisms, but the picture was clear. Ava, with Julian Thorne's help, had been buying looted antiquities. The secure location was likely a Freeport vault in Singapore or Switzerland. They couldn't sell them or display them without proper paperwork, and the source had dried up or been scared off. They were sitting on a multi-million-dollar pile of hot, culturally sensitive pottery. "And you want me to do what?" I asked. "Forge the paperwork? Track down the thief?" Diana spoke for the first time, her voice a dry rustle. "We want you to be a custodian, a facilitator. The artifacts need to be transferred from their current location to a new one. A private collector in the Middle East has expressed The week between the dinner and my scheduled flight to Zurich was a study in psychological bifurcation. I lived 2 lives. The first was the one I showed Dot and Dave, a man slightly preoccupied with work, maybe a little tired, but fundamentally unchanged. I ate Dot's chili. I joked with Gus about the Patriots' sorry prospects. I listened to Dave grumble about a supplier. I performed normalcy with an actor's dedication, the Sterling's cold library a sealed chamber in my mind. The second life was lived in the shadows of that chamber. It was a life of quiet, furious research, conducted on library computers and in the privacy of my apartment with the blinds drawn. I learned about UNESCO conventions on cultural property. I memorized the specific penalties under U.S. law for smuggling antiquities. I studied the labyrinthine world of free ports, those tax-neutral, secrecy-shrouded warehouses where the ultra-wealthy stored everything from gold bars to old masters, no questions asked. I read about Interpol's stolen art division. I wasn't planning to be a good smuggler. I was planning to be a catastrophic one. My plan was simple in concept, exquisitely dangerous in execution. I would follow the Sterling's instructions to the letter, up to a point. I would go to Zurich, I would retrieve the crates, but I would not take them to Dubai. Instead, I would redirect them. I would deliver them not to a waiting sheik, but to the one place the Sterlings would never expect and could never control, the authorities. Specifically, to the Cultural Heritage Protection Unit of the Swiss Federal Office of Culture, with a carbon copy to the FBI's art crime team. It was a suicide mission. I would be admitting to international smuggling. I would be implicating myself to avoid prison in 2 countries. My only hope was a plea deal, my testimony and the physical evidence of the artifacts in exchange for immunity and for the full, crushing weight of the law to come down on Robert, Diana, and most especially, Ava. I would trade my freedom for theirs, and I would use the Sterling's own money, the $2 million fee, to fund the world's most expensive act of self-immolation, hiring the best international lawyer I could find to negotiate the terms of my surrender. It was a Hail Mary pass thrown from my own end zone. The odds of it working were microscopic. The odds of me spending the next decade in a foreign prison were overwhelming. But it was the only move I had that protected Dave. If I was the cooperating witness who brought down a smuggling ring, the Sterlings would be in no position to touch him. Their empire would be too busy collapsing. The night before my flight, I sat with Dot on her couch. She was flipping through a catalog for new diner booths. "You're quiet," she said, not looking up. "Just thinking about work," I said, the lie a physical ache. She put the catalog down and looked at me. Her gaze was direct, unsettling. "This thing with Gus's brother's boat, it's taking a lot out of you. It's a tricky job." She didn't believe me. I could see the doubt in her eyes, the concern she was too smart to voice. She knew I was hiding something, but she trusted me enough, or loved me enough, to not pry. It was the worst feeling in the world. "Just be careful, okay? I know you think you're indestructible under a hood, but the ocean's different." I took her hand, rough and warm. "I'll be careful, I promise." The promise was another lie. I was walking into a storm, and careful was no longer an option. Zurich was a city of crisp, clean lines and discreet, staggering wealth. The cafe where I was to meet my contact was in the old town, all cobblestones and whispering fountains. My contact was a pale, nervous man in an expensive but ill-fitting suit. He said his name was Klaus. He didn't make small talk. He slid a key and a slip of paper with a 9-digit alphanumeric code across the table, along with a ticket for a secure locker at the Hauptbahnhof. "The instructions for the charter are in the locker. Flight is tomorrow at 10 a.m. from Zurich Airport, private terminal. Be on it." He left without touching his espresso. The Freeport was a featureless modern fortress on the outskirts of the city. Inside, it was a temple of silence and security. My key and code granted me access to a specific aisle in a vast, humming warehouse. My footsteps echoed in the sterile chill. I found the locker, a massive brushed steel door. Using the key and code, I opened it. Inside were 2 unassuming wooden crates, each about the size of a small suitcase. They were stenciled with meaningless numbers. They felt heavier than they looked, the weight of history, of crime, of my potential future. This was the point of no return. Taking possession was the crime. I loaded them onto a waiting dolly and wheeled them out. A prearranged van was waiting. The driver took me to an anonymous upmarket hotel. The crates sat in the middle of my room, inert yet screaming. I didn't open them. I didn't need to. I knew what was inside, the spiritual heritage of a culture, reduced to a commodity, a bargaining chip in the Sterling power play. I spent the night staring at those crates. I thought of Dave's hands on an engine block, of Dot's laugh, of the smell of my apartment, the life I was about to throw away. The fear was a living thing, coiling in my chest, cold and slick. This wasn't the clean pain Robert had mentioned. This was a dirty, terrifying, possibly futile agony. But I thought of Ava's triumphant smile in the library, of Robert's cold assessment of Dave's life as economic fragility, of Diana's predatory gaze. They had to be stopped. Not just for me, but because people like them never stopped. They would find another Mark, another Dave, another set of crates. The game would continue. At dawn, I did not call the charter company. Instead, I made 2 calls from a burner phone I'd bought at the airport. The first was to a number I'd found for the Swiss Federal Office of Culture, Cultural Heritage Protection. I asked for the director, speaking in the calm, urgent French I'd painstakingly rehearsed. When I was connected to an assistant, I said, "I am in possession of 2 crates containing looted pre-Columbian artifacts smuggled into Zurich Freeport. I wish to surrender them and myself and provide evidence implicating the American family who arranged the shipment. My name is Mark Barlow. I am at the Hotel Ambassador. I will wait for your agents." The second call was to the FBI's tip line for art crime, routed through the U.S. Embassy. I gave the same information, adding my passport number. "I am turning myself in to Swiss authorities this morning. I request liaison with the FBI. I will provide full cooperation." Then I sat on the bed and waited. The knock came within 40 minutes. It was not subtle. 3 men in dark suits and 2 uniformed Swiss police officers. They were efficient, professional, and utterly grim. I showed them the crates. One of the suits, a man with a careful, impassive face named Herr Dr. Schneider, produced a small toolkit. With my permission, he carefully pried open one crate. Inside, nested in custom-cut gray foam, was a sculpture. It was a crouching figure of a jaguar, carved from dark green stone, its surface intricately patterned. It was breathtakingly old, pulsing with a silent, stolen power. Even I could feel it. The air in the hotel room seemed to change. Schneider let out a soft breath, not of awe, but of profound gravity. He looked at me. "This is a Maya piece from the Peten region. It has been missing for decades. Where are the export permits?" "There are none," I said, my voice steady. "I was hired to smuggle these to Dubai. I am choosing to surrender them. I have a full statement prepared, with names, dates, and financial trails. I will give it to you and to the FBI in exchange for a plea agreement for immunity in Switzerland and the United States for these specific acts, contingent on my complete and continuing cooperation. A protective order for my brother and his business to be monitored by the FBI. My testimony will be sealed until indictments are unsealed. I will be released today, but I will remain under a form of house arrest in Switzerland until the initial phase of the investigation is complete. I cannot contact the Sterling family or their associates. I cannot return to the United States until we give the all clear." I signed without reading the fine print. It didn't matter. I had done it. The release was anticlimactic. I was given back my clothes, my passport, stamped with a temporary visa restricting my movement, and a cheap mobile phone. I was installed in a small, safe house apartment on the outskirts of Zurich, watched by a polite but firm Swiss police officer stationed outside. I was free, and yet utterly trapped. But I had a phone call. One call, monitored. I called Dave. It rang twice. "Dave's auto." "Dave? It's Mark." "Mark? Where the hell are you? Dot's been going out of her mind. Said you were on a boat job, but that was days ago. She called the Coast Guard, for Christ's sake." The safe house in Zurich was a study in beige limbo. Time lost its shape, measured not in days, but in the comings and goings of my Swiss police minder, Officer Kohler, and the occasional taut visits from Eliane Martel. The world beyond the blinds, the orderly streets, the distant Alps, the efficient hum of a nation that prized discretion above all else, felt like a diorama. I was a specimen under glass, preserved for a future I could no longer imagine. The legal machinery ground on with a slow, implacable force. My immunity agreement was a fortress of legalese, but the foundation was my continued cooperation. I spent hours with sketch artists, describing Julian Thorne, Klaus, the interior of the Sterling Library. I pored over financial documents, tracing the hypothetical paths of the promised investment into Dave's business. I relived the dinner, the recording playing back in sterile conference rooms, my own voice sounding like a stranger's. Martel was my only conduit to the outside. "The Americans are moving," she told me one afternoon, her briefcase snapping open with surgical precision. "A grand jury has been convened in the Southern District of New York. Sealed indictments are being prepared for Robert, Diana, and Ava Sterling on charges of conspiracy to commit international antiquity smuggling, wire fraud, and blackmail. Interpol notices will follow." "What about Julian Thorne, Klaus?" "Lower priority. Useful for corroboration, but the target is the family, the architecture of the scheme." She gave me a look that was not unkind, but entirely professional. "You have provided the blueprint. Now they are building the case." "And my brother?" "A protective detail has been discreetly assigned. His business finances are being monitored for any anomalous activity. So far, nothing. The Sterlings appear to be unaware of the storm that is about to break over them. They believe you are in Dubai, completing the transaction." A ghost of a smile. "Their arrogance is their vulnerability." Their arrogance. It was the fuel that had powered my gamble. But in the silence of my confinement, a new, chilling doubt began to whisper. Had I been arrogant too? Had I truly outmaneuvered Robert Sterling, a man who had spent a lifetime anticipating and neutralizing threats? The first crack in my fragile sense of control came not from the Sterlings, but from my own world. Officer Kohler, a man of few words and a perpetual slight frown, handed me a secure satellite phone one evening. "A call for you, from the United States. Your lawyer has approved it. 5 minutes. It was Dave. His voice was stripped raw, a low rumble of pure anguish. "Mark." "Dave? What's wrong? Are you okay? Is it the shop?" "The shop's fine. It's Dot." The world tilted. "What do you mean about Dot?" "She came by the shop 2 days ago, looked like hell, said she hadn't heard from you in over a week, that your calls went straight to voicemail, that your landlord said you'd paid up 3 months in advance and vanished. She thought you were dead, or that you'd left her." He took a shuddering breath. "I tried, Mark. I tried to tell her you were okay, that it was some legal thing, that you'd explain. But she just looked at me, this look of total betrayal. She said, 'You used the boat story. You lied to my face.' She left. Yesterday she cleared out her apartment, left her key with the super, quit her job at the diner. Gone. No forwarding address. Her phone's disconnected." The silence on the line was a roaring in my ears. I had protected Dave from the Sterlings, but I had failed to protect Dot from me, from my lies, my necessary, brutal secrecy. I had chosen the nuclear option to save one family, and in the blast radius, I had annihilated the future I had been fighting for. "Dave, What did you do, Mark?" His voice broke. "What did you get into that was worth this?" I had no answer that would make sense to him. The noble cause, the fight against corruption, it was ash in my mouth. All he could see was the wreckage, a brother turned ghost, a good woman shattered. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, the words utterly inadequate. The line went dead. My 5 minutes were up. That night, the silence of the safe house became a physical presence, a weight on my chest. I had traded my life for justice, but justice was an abstract, cold god. Dot's face, the crinkle of her eyes when she laughed, the solid warmth of her shoulder against mine, these were real, and I had sacrificed them on an altar I wasn't sure I even believed in anymore. Martell found me the next morning staring at a blank wall. She assessed my state with a clinical eye. "The psychological toll is expected. You must stay focused. The end game is approaching." "What's the point?" I heard myself say, my voice flat. "I stopped them, but they still took everything." "They did not take your integrity," she said sharply. "A luxury, perhaps, to think that way, but it is the only thing they could not purchase or destroy. You chose it. Remember that." But integrity felt like a cold, hard stone in a barren landscape. It didn't keep you warm at night. It didn't answer the phone. The storm broke 2 weeks later. Martell arrived, her usual composure crackling with a fierce energy. "It is done. The indictments are unsealed. Warrants issued. Interpol red notices for all 3. The news is breaking everywhere." She turned on the small television in the safe house. The sterile Swiss news was replaced by the frenetic energy of American cable news. A sleek news anchor stood in front of a stock photo of the Sterling townhouse. "Shocking fall of grace for one of New York's most prominent philanthropic families. Robert Sterling, his wife Diana, and their daughter Ava Sterling are wanted by federal authorities in connection with a massive international antiquity smuggling ring. Sources say the scheme unraveled when a would-be smuggler, reportedly a former associate of the family, turned himself in to Swiss authorities with a cache of looted artifacts and a stunning secret recording." My photo, an old one from my corporate days, flashed on the screen. I looked young, hopeful, naive, a stranger. Then footage shot on a chaotic New York street. Robert Sterling, stone-faced, flanked by his lawyers, moving through a scrum of reporters, a federal agent at his elbow. Diana, wearing oversized sunglasses, her head held high in a performance of wounded dignity. And Ava. They caught her trying to leave through a service entrance of the townhouse. She wasn't floating. She was stumbling, her perfect hair disheveled, her silver dress, a different one but the same species of armor, looking absurd in the harsh morning light. The serene mask was gone, shattered into a raw, animal panic. She tried to shield her face from the cameras, her eyes wide with a terror that was utterly, devastatingly real. She wasn't a beautiful void anymore. She was a cornered, frightened young woman facing the loss of her entire world. I felt no triumph, only a profound, weary sadness. She had built her life on a foundation of beautiful lies, and now the ground was giving way. Her uselessness hadn't protected her. It had made her an easy, perfect target. The news cycle devoured the story. The Sterling scandal had everything. Money, art, family betrayal, a secret recording. My name was everywhere. The mysterious former associate who had brought down a dynasty. Speculation ran wild. I was a jilted lover, a disgruntled employee, a righteous whistleblower. None of it mattered. I was a character in a story I no longer recognized. The extradition process began. The Sterlings fought, of course, with their battalion of high-priced lawyers, but the evidence, the artifacts, the recording, the financial trails, was a mountain. My sealed testimony was the capstone. I remained in Zurich, a ghost in the machine. The U.S. government, now my reluctant host, arranged for my eventual relocation to a new identity, somewhere in America, far from anyone I had ever known. Witness protection. The final erasure. The day before my scheduled clandestine flight to my new nowhere, I was granted a final, heavily supervised outing. Not as a treat, but as a psychological pressure valve. Officer Kohler drove me to a quiet park overlooking the Zurich Sea. I could walk, within sight, breathe unfiltered air. I sat on a bench watching the orderly sailboats tilt in the breeze. The Alps were a crisp white postcard in the distance. It was a vision of peace I could no longer feel. A woman sat down on the far end of the bench. She was older, dressed in a simple, expensive linen shift. She wore large sunglasses. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it was Diana, but the posture was different, stiller, sadder. She didn't look at me. She spoke to the lake. She asked me to come. I knew the voice. It was older, wearier, stripped of its performative warmth and its cutting edge, but it was hers. "You shouldn't be here, Diana," I said, my eyes fixed ahead. Kohler was watching from the car, but he wouldn't recognize her. To him, she was just another elegant Zurich matron. "They've frozen everything. The house, the accounts. My facility has politely asked me to seek treatment elsewhere. Robert isn't speaking to anyone. His lawyers say